Marjorie Chretien from La Jolla, California. They came a long way to be with us. They're witnesses of Jehovah is a revealing film that they're going to give us a demonstration, a preview of. They're going to tell us their life story and about the false prophet of 1975 and all that. After 22 years of active service, can you imagine that? They now have found peace in knowing Jesus as their personal Savior, Lord, and their God.
I decided to use an outline because Marjorie and I suffer from talking fever. It would at least keep a fairly tight limit then on the time that we would spend. I think that to begin with, when we conclude or come to conclusions concerning persons that come into Jehovah's Witnesses, persons that become Jehovah's Witnesses, I think there's a certain common denominator that seems to emerge as you think about it. It's very difficult to generalize and kind of dangerous to do so because there's always variations on the theme. But I think there are some things that seem to always come out time and time again. I think there's three basic types or three basic situations that seem to prevail. There's the unfortunate individual, like my dear daughter, who was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, had very little choice in the matter. It was a generational situation. In that case, she was a second generation Jehovah's Witness. There's the situation where a person is in actual fact, excuse me, I've got a bit of an imported California cold. There's a situation where an individual may be favorably disposed to Jehovah's Witnesses. We'll talk about that for a moment, and we'll be more specific in a moment as well. And then there's the Bible illiterate. This might be a person, in fact, who attends a church, I'm sad to say, but that knows very little about the Scriptures, cannot defend the Christian faith, cannot give a Christian witness. Or the person who, again, was born and raised in perhaps an agnostic, atheistic household. I think within the framework of that, or in orbit around that, somehow, most of the individuals who become Jehovah's Witnesses have one of these basic elements involved. In my case, I was two of the above. I was a Bible illiterate, essentially. And actually, I was favorably disposed to the witness message. And my example will give you an idea of what I mean when I say a person can be favorably disposed, because that can happen in a variety of ways. In my particular instance, the family had moved into a particular area, and as a young boy of about 13, I think I was at the time, you quickly begin to make some friends in the area that you have moved into. And one of the friends that I made was a young man, Pat Condon was his name, and his family at that particular time, and we're talking now in, I guess it's sort of the late 40s, yeah. His family was in fact studying with the witnesses at the time. They were engaged in a home Bible study. I love that family. I love that family like a second family. They were really the closest people, the closest relationship in many respects that I can remember down through the years. Pat became my best friend. The Condons themselves were great people. They were marvelous people. And they were having this study. Now, I got to the point where they would answer some questions that I would have. I said, well, I don't go for religion at all. Anybody that tell me there's a burning hell and this and that, it's just a lot of nonsense and I don't have any time for it. And they said, well, just a minute. You're making a judgment call without maybe any real accurate information. So I didn't have anything to work with. And they would show me these things. Gee, I'm getting some answers here. This is really interesting. And over a period of time then, I became favorably disposed to it. I began to realize, though, I didn't want to go there on, I think it was a Wednesday night or whatever, because I did find that little study they had a little bit on the boring, dry side. So I would come after or whatever. Or now and again, I'd forget and I'd show up. But nevertheless, this influence was that I had no umbrage with Jehovah's Witnesses. I liked them. I liked them as people. And from time to time, they would invite me to go to what I recognize now as a circuit assembly or whatever. And there was no reason for me to put down Jehovah's Witnesses. I knew them as to be nice people. And then, of course, as my teenage life unfolded and so on, and got into high school and so forth, I did get sidetracked into evolution and things like that. But at the same time, if I ever had a religious thought to come into my mind, or if I was acting in some sort of a way that religious ideas should come into my mind to correct those ways, whatever, my thinking always seemed to gravitate to the Jehovah's Witness viewpoint, because that is what I knew in just a very rudimentary way, of course, but that's the only thing I knew that had this smack of religion. And then we'll talk about more things, how we went from there, after maybe Marge just fills us in a bit.
Can you hear me? Way down here? Yes, okay. Actually, in the late 40s, my family started to study with Jehovah's Witnesses. We lived in a small town in Ontario, Canada, and our home became the center in that small town where persons would be invited for a public discourse to hear a speaker, or Judge Rutherford's records would be played if the speaker could not come. And I can remember setting the chairs up on the lawn outside on a Sunday afternoon for these public discourses. My father and mother, of course, were having a study with witnesses in the home every week. And my father was a plumbing and heating contractor, and he was putting a furnace in a small evangelical church one day. And while he was in the process of installing this furnace, the marvelous Christian man there took time to be there conveniently on regular occasions and whatever he told my father immunized my father against further Jehovah's Witness studies, and my father canceled these studies and these public discourses at our home. Still, my mother continued on attending Jehovah's Witness meetings in the nearby city, and she was baptized in 1952. We children were not forced to attend meetings. My father said we didn't have to, but occasionally we would accompany my mother. She arranged for me to attend the 1953 New York Assembly with some witnesses. And, of course, as a 15-year-old girl, I was very much impressed by this mass of people coming out of a small town, and having attended a small congregation occasionally, here I saw this great, vast crowd of people, and of course it does have a tremendous solidifying effect on a very young mind, and I was very much impressed. So you can see how I, too, was very favorably disposed to Jehovah's Witnesses. So you can see where Len and I both were really set up for what was to come.
We met each other, and which is his own story. I don't want to bore you with that, but we met each other. Not that the story was boring, but I mean, time moves on. You know what I mean?
It was wonderful.
Anyway, we met, and that was a very amazing thing, that she had been set up in that regard, and I had been set up, as I mentioned earlier. And we dated for a period of time and so forth, and became engaged. And I remember it. I can remember it as clearly as if it happened last week. I remember us driving along. This was 1955. 55, yes. And we were driving along Lakeshore Road, my Chevy convertible. We were engaged. We were chatting away, and that was in the days of the slick black hair. You know, you had it back with the oil and all the rest of it. Anyway, I think you see that on TV, you know. Anyway, a little bit of a nostalgia run here. But we were chatting about things, and we were chatting about things in a serious vein, because we appreciated that we were going to be married in 8 or 9 months, whatever it was. And we knew about this end of the world. That the world was supposed to come to an end. Matter of fact, those convents that I mentioned to you, believe it or not, they had a placard once when there was some, I guess it was a district assembly in Toronto, across their house. Huge thing, right across the whole house, a banner. It's later than you think. They did some pretty amazing things in those days, as you all remember. But anyway, we were talking about this and the fact that the world was going to end and it was going to be coming soon and all the rest of it. And we said, well, you know, if this is true, well, we better get with it. If it's not true, then we better discard it. One way or the other, we better check this thing out, because you just can't go along blissfully, ignoring this. And so, shortly after we got married, we got talking about it one day. As a matter of fact, I was washing that self-same little Chevy convertible, and a man walked in and got chatting away and gave me an invitation to the local Kingdom Hall, and the talk was on evolution, which actually caught my attention. I thought, I've been to talks before, but this particular one caught my attention. I went inside and I said, Marge, I guess we should go to Kingdom Hall today, to that Kingdom Hall, and listen to that talk. So when we went there, we heard the talk. I was favorably impressed. As a matter of fact, it was an excellent talk, quite frankly. They handled the whole matter quite well. At the conclusion, in those days also, they had as you're probably well aware, we've got these men over here that were generations of witnesses. You'd remember it, and other ones. They would have an intermission between the talk and the Watchtower. And I remember going up to the speaker. I remember that very clearly as well. Introduced myself, and I said, how do you go about having one of these studies in your home? After he picked himself up off the floor, he took my name and address and so forth, and so started the whole Bible study arrangement. And we became baptized Jehovah's Witnesses in July of 1960.
We studied for approximately 3 years, and during that period of time, our daughter, Lorraine, was born. With her birth, I found out that I have Rh-negative blood, and I had just had an Rh-positive baby. So this put me at risk for any other future babies to have a blood issue arise. We were baptized in 60, as Leonard said, and in the next few years, our daughter being 3 or 4, we were considering having another child. At the time, there was a tremendous amount of blood issue cases with babies, Rh-negative babies, in Canada. And it was front page sensationalism, just it seemed case after case after case. It was very difficult to go door to door. The people became so fired up and enraged over these babies and what was going on that I went to my doctor and asked her what were the chances of my having difficulty with the next birth, and she said there is no way that a doctor knows whether you will have difficulty after that first child. You could have more than 1, 2, 3. Some women have had up to 5 and 6, never had a problem, but sometimes also with that next child. So Leonard and I, not wanting to create any kind of a situation that would bring bad reputation on the society or create any kind of difficulty for the brothers and sisters in going door to door, we decided that we would not have any more children. And so we only have 1 child today.
Like many Jehovah's Witnesses of the time, the 60s were a very interesting thing. Life Everlasting and Freedom of the Sons of God, of course, came out in the year 1966 and set the tone for the next 9 years. We believed it. I think it's David Reed, if I'm not mistaken, in one of his tapes or something, he mentions that even to this day he examines the mirror every day to see the hole in his head where his brains leaked out. But fact is, we kind of bought it hook, line, and sinker. I had, in 1965, started a business in an area of expertise that I had and so forth, and had developed quite a prosperous little business. My main account, not that that's of any interest particularly, but was Procter & Gamble. I did a lot of work with them, and the business was prospering. It was a very good little business. And we had this idea, came into our mind that we should sell the business. Get rid of the business, we don't need it. It was 1972 by that time. And so we did. We sold the business, and so we could devote more time to kingdom interests. We could, reach out more and so forth. And as we did that, then I guess it was 2 years later, we sold our house in 1974. Now, you have to have some kind of belief to do that, and it's amazing to me today when we hear these stories about the society, how they try to push the blame on the individuals that were making up the congregations at the time, that we never told you anything and everything else. We'd have to be some kind of a mental case to have imagined that 1975 was some smoky, nebulous thing, and you sell your prosperous business and you sell your house, and we were just one of many, many, many. The Kingdom Ministry of May 1974, which many of you have read, of course, after this inspiring article, How Are You Using Your Life? They go on to say, yes, the end of this system is so very near. Is that not reason to increase our activity? And blah, blah, down to about here. Reports are heard of brothers selling their homes and property and planning to finish out the rest of their days in this old system in the pioneer service. Certainly, this is a fine way to spend the short time remaining before the wicked world's end. Who are they addressing this to? I mean, and why did they do that? Was that a hobby or a habit that people would suddenly be seized upon? Of course not. And, of course, our talk today is not going to, this evening, going to develop all of that. There's enough material back there to prove to anybody in the audience what the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society said concerning 1975. Well, of course, 1975 came and went. And you might as well wait Armageddon out in California as anywhere else. So we moved. I sold my business. I sold my house. I really was not doing anything in almost like a secular way. I just rapidly driving myself into poverty, I guess. But what I did was Marjorie and I, because we didn't have those commitments, and my daughter had got married, as a matter of fact, and so we moved to California in 1976. And the Watchtower, of course, tried to gloss over 1975. I think it was 77. They were starting to, persons of this and that and the other thing, and why did people do this, and all of those sophomoric articles. I remember at the time then, the society suddenly got the idea they were feeling the vibes. They were getting the messages from the troops that people were very, very unhappy. They had a tremendous amount of people leaving, left, right, and center, just leaving, walking away. And so in their endeavor to stir up the troops and to shove the blame on the persons that would accept it, they would send men from Bethel, different parts of the country, to give pep talks. And at the Del Mar racetrack, we rented, of course I was an elder during this period and so forth, we rented the Del Mar racetrack, and they sent Harley Miller out from Brooklyn to give us a little talk. And Marjorie and I were sitting in front of the front row, and this was 1977, incidentally. Yeah. We were sitting fairly close to the front, and Harley got up there, and he was droning on about things and this and that, and it was a really classic case of waffling. I mean, the man should have been a politician. Fact of the matter is, anyway, he developed this thought that as he had driven in, he says, as I drove in today, he says, I noticed this gigantic palm tree sitting out here, and she says, give his voice, and it was really strident. He was getting very strident by this point, and he says, well, what am I, a ventriloquist? I mean, he says, when I came in here today, I saw this gigantic palm tree out here, quite a large one. And I say to you out there, those that are dissatisfied about 75 and what did or didn't occur at that time, I say to you, go on out under that palm tree and cry about it.
I had been a very submissive, wait on Jehovah type of person. When he said that, I had my first, what I call my plate slip. When you know how when the earthquakes happen, it's because a plate has slipped. Marjorie just went, boom. My throat filled with tears. I almost sprang to my feet. Tears were in my eyes, and I turned to my husband and I said, I want to leave. And he said, Marjorie, we can't do that. Here we were sitting down front. Well, no, we're going to get up and walk out. Well, of course, it was just my reaction of the moment. Of course, I calmed down. I was shaking. I had never had an experience like that. Of course, now, looking back, I realize what had happened. The sheepskin had slipped, and I had seen the wolf. I remember coming home from that meeting and speaking rather indignantly, or almost an emotional why, to a couple that we knew well from Canada who had also come into the United States. I said to them, when the disciples said to Jesus that, are you establishing the kingdom at this time, Lord? I said, he didn't shout at them. They wanted something beautiful. They wanted something good. And he understood that. And he was going to have to disappoint them by telling them the kingdom wasn't going to come when they wanted it. So he lovingly told them, no, it will be a little longer. You'll have to wait. That is how I would have expected Jesus' representative to have come out and handled the flock when they too wanted this kingdom to come, to be established and so forth. Instead, he had ripped at the sheep. In the next 2 years, this was in the spring of 77 this happened, 3 things would come in, and they were, well, I shouldn't say they're not big things, but they were just unique little things. A Good Housekeeping magazine had an article on the 1,500 religions of America, and it listed them according to ABCD, and it started with Adventists, and under Adventists was Jehovah's Witnesses. Whew. 22 years I've been a witness, and how come they're tying us into Adventists? That didn't kind of sit well. But then I noticed under the heading of Jehovah's Witnesses, they put breakaway groups, and there were about 10 to 12 breakaway groups. And I thought, who are these breakaway groups? I have always been under the impression that as Jehovah's Witnesses, we were united worldwide. How come I have never heard of all of these, and it listed the names of these religious organizations? Why have I never heard of these religious organizations that broke away? Why did they break away? So that was sitting in my mind. And there were many questions, of course, through the years that you always shelve. Biblical scriptures that you have problems with, you shelve all those. But then 1978 comes along, Jonestown. Over 900 people die. I knew that those people had died in vain. That man was not a prophet, not a man to be following, and they had given their lives. I knew, I had resolved that I would die for this organization. And I knew that there were brothers and sisters who had died for it in Nazi concentration camps, in hospitals over the blood issue. I was prepared to die for this organization, for these men in Brooklyn. So I thought to myself, Marjorie, you better be very sure who you're prepared to die for, because you don't want to be dying in vain like those people in Jonestown. Still, late 78 now, we receive the 1979 yearbook, remembering that, in fact, the Watchtower is still placing the blame for 75 upon over-enthusiastic members, whatever. It was our fault still at that point. Being a dutiful witness, I tried to read my yearbook through the minute it came in. So I start to read this yearbook, and they feature Burma at this time. And I don't know if you know where Burma is. Burma is a country on the Indian Ocean, India to the one side, China and Thailand. It's a rather remote offshore country. And in reading about Burma, I was reading about the struggles of how they had gotten the few publishers they had and how very hard it was to do the work in Burma. Definitely one of those stories of struggle and slow gains. The foreign missionaries had been expelled in 65, and they had very strong travel restrictions. Very few outsiders allowed in, and when so, they would only be allowed to stay maybe a day and so forth. So here was a group of witnesses that were pretty isolated from the rest of us, that whatever information they got it basically through the publications and an occasional visit from a representative. In Burma, the brothers entered Burma in 1914. 50 years later, in 1965, they only had 270 publishers in that 50-year period. Within the next 10 years, between 1965 and 1975, that would triple to 822 publishers. Here again, we see immediately the effect of this prophecy. Obviously, Burma had received some information that made them put on this tremendous surge that if in 50 years they'd only grown to 270 people, but in 10 more years they will triple. And anyway, it goes on, it says here, especially after 1967, did our work begin progressing rapidly. Within 4 years, the number of witnesses in Burma nearly doubled. So that was into the early 70s. And of course, as I say, by 75, they have tripled. It says, thus in 1971, nearly half of the witnesses in Burma had been baptized within the previous 4 years. I'm reading along, and then finally it says here, during the 1977 service year, there was a 1% decrease in the number of this country's kingdom proclaimers. That was the first time in the history of Jehovah's Witnesses in Burma that we had a decrease. Why did this occur? Some stopped associating with us because events did not develop as they expected in the year 1975. Wham! I look at that, and I've come through their trials and tribulations. And here, of course, at this point, the Watchtower has not yet admitted that they have a part in it. And to me it was, I knew now that they were responsible for this 75 prediction. Because it wasn't our fault. It was their fault. They'd predicted it. These poor guys out in this remote offshore country of Burma sure got the message, and they had had these effects from this 1975 prediction. So I realized that 75 wasn't our fault, and they weren't admitting it, and I was furious over the fact that they were not humble enough to admit they had made a mistake. By now, my relationship with the governing body is minimal. I have no respect for them at all. But, of course, I still believe it is the truth. And the old thing that something wrong with them, you know. At this point, I pray to Jehovah. I say to him, I believe this is the true religion, and I will serve you faithfully as I have all through these years. But if it is not the truth, how will I know? You will have to be the one to show me if it's wrong. Finishing my prayer with the feeling that I still was in the truth. When you stop relying on yourself and you turn it over to God, things really start happening.
As an elder, of course, I was very aware of some of these things. I was also aware of Marjorie. We talked about these matters, obviously. We were both traveling along sort of a parallel way. At the same time, I was always a loyal soldier. I continued to always think, well, we'll just wait and see, wait on the corrections, this and that, the other thing. It's, of course, a very sobering experience to be an elder because, as Rick mentioned this morning, you handle some just incredible things, and I have stories that would take the paint off the walls of this room, which we're not going to bother with, obviously. And I used to think from time to time, as we'd handle these things, some of them were important, some of them were weighty, and some of them I really struggled with because I would see how we'd be handling this case of horrific proportions, and would be handling almost in the same way some poor soul that had fallen back into smoking because of something that happened in their lives and they went back to an old habit they had or whatever. Smoking is a dirty habit, sure it is, but I don't think it's a salvation issue. I didn't think it then, I don't think it now. And all the pharmakeia nonsense and the rationalization of this and that and the other thing, and there was always bound books. We always referred to the bound books that had far more power in a judicial committee than the Bible. It was always as the Watchtower shows and so on. These things bugged me. They bothered me. But we carry on and so forth. But Marjorie's prayer, we look back on it, we try to chronologically put it together, because sometimes when all these things are happening, you're not really paying attention to this. You're not writing some kind of a history book, but you kind of let your mind roll back into this. And actually the answer came to her prayer not 5 weeks later in an elders meeting. At that time, as it was happening all over the place, there was this so-called spat of apostasy. It was going on all over the place. It really was. I mean, around the world, but I mean, specifically here in North America. And it had been, of course, a result of 1975. And San Diego was not exempt. There were groups of individuals that were talking to their friends and so forth and circulating material, et cetera, et cetera. And we elders were well aware of that. We were well aware of it. Matter of fact, there had been a congregation not far by, not too far away, that actually the doors and everything had been barred by the apostates, which was just a little overboard, but I guess little zealous individuals. So we were well aware of what was going on. We assembled this day for our quarterly elders meeting, or quarterly elderlies meeting, as you might almost think of it sometimes, because they could get very boring too. But anyway, one of the brothers came in, one of my fellow elders came in, and while we were just waiting before it started, we were chatting a little bit and so on, and he says, Elmer Alstott brought me this package, and he had this big brown manila envelope. He said, at the Thursday night meeting, and he says, it's from the apostates, and he said, Elmer got this, and he brought it to me. He says, Brother Wright, I got this in the mail, almost like it was hot or something, you know. And he said, but I didn't read it. And Brother Wright said, Jim said to him something along the lines of commendation. Why, this was excellent and all the rest of it, and commended him. And I said, well, what do you mean you commended him, Jim? I said, it's not that big a deal. I said, if we have the truth, we will blow that away. He looked at me for a long moment, and he said, I read it, Leonard, and I'm not so sure that we can so easily blow it away. So I said, do you have it? And he pulled it out. And here's the old original copy. And I said, well, the meeting's about to begin. I said, we have to know what we're going to be facing. Let me have it. I put it in my case. The moment the elders meeting was over, and the moment I got in that door at home, I went immediately into my den, and I read that thing from page to page. There's 13 pages of questions, fine print, many of which, as I read them, I said, those are questions that I had so many times, and I put them on the back burner because I didn't have the time to research them, or I thought, wait on Jehovah. It was a paper document that had been produced by Chris Christensen and I found out later a man by the name of Randy Wysong up in Michigan, and these were Jehovah's Witnesses looking for reform. Anyway, I read this and I said, Marjorie, come in here. And I said, sit down and read this.
Just a little few words. I, of course, had prayed my prayer, and he told me, of course, as he was about to read this, that this was something from the apostates. And then he said, Marjorie, read this. And I have to admit, as I sat down, my knees were shaking, because you're afraid of what you're about to do. And there's that little war. Should I be doing this? Should I be doing this? Am I being unfaithful? But then I remembered, remember your prayer. So I too read it. And they were valid questions, and they needed answers.
What kind of an elder am I? Read this. No, actually, quite frankly, Marjorie and I always had a very, very good relationship. I never told her all the stories that I was not to tell her. I never did. As elders, we weren't to do that. But
Told me after.
after we left, sit down. I got a couple of years of stuff to tell you. Seriously, we had a very, very good rapport on these matters. And we talked about spiritual things. We talked about current teachings, current because they change, as you know, quite frequently. But as I read this, all of these doubts, some of them that were just a little out of focus, things that I hadn't really thought through to a conclusion, okay, but had always been there kind of in an out of focus way, they were just all coming into focus. And can you believe that I still thought, all right, okay, armed with this and using that maybe as a point of departure in my thinking as the new light comes down the track and as I teach the Watchtower from the platform and as I do all these things, let's not do anything hasty. You know, we spend a long time in this thing. We have quite an investment in time. We have our lives. We have all of those things at stake. Let's be cool. And that was true, but you know, the Holy Spirit was beginning to work. And I look back on it now, and I see things happening in my life, personally, that I realize we speak about and we hear about the wooing of the Holy Spirit. And I can honestly say I think I've experienced that. I remember, I think it was probably 6 months after this, I was giving a talk at a circuit assembly. There must have been about 2,200 people in attendance. A beautiful big assembly hall we built and so forth, and they're all out there talking away. And I looked up from my notes for a moment, and the talk was going quite well, no problem. And the most incredible thing, I cannot say, because that would be exaggerating, I cannot say it was a literal vision, okay? But it was an entirely different viewpoint that came into my mind in a moment of time. And it seemed like an eternity, actually. But I know it was only a few seconds, second or two, whatever it was. I looked there, and I didn't see Jehovah's happy people. I suddenly saw a lot of people that were abused and bruised and kicked around. I saw people that were tired, hitting their children, and just dragged out. That only lasted a second or two. I regathered my thoughts. I went back to my notes, and I looked back, and everything was as before. And not in itself was that very much, but when I get along in about another 2 or 3 minutes, it'll have a little more meaning. I also changed my whole talk schedule. As you know, the elders are sent out to all the various congregations, and we have a reasonably large city, and I would be sent out quite frequently. And I had a repertoire of talks, as we all did. I don't know, a dozen talks, whatever. And I said to the brother that was in charge of it, I said, you can book me out, but there's only one talk I want to give. Only one, period. Knock all the rest off the list. The life and death of Jesus Christ. And I took the society's outline. And in those days, you could rework it to a measure. Couldn't go too far, but you could rework it. And I reworked it. It became a very popular talk. Amazingly, it became a very popular talk. And I realize, I think back on it now, I'm amazed how close I was to the edge of historical Christianity, and I was getting away with telling it from the platforms. And it was a talk that the brothers would phone in, they'd say, you got Brother Chretien who gives this talk, we heard da-da-da-da. And I had occasion to give that talk many, many times. It was the only talk I'd give. And another interesting little event, and these things were all happening fairly rapidly. This was not some elastic, elongated period of time. They were happening fairly rapidly. One night at 3 o'clock in the morning, that's really a morning, it's not a night, I'm awakened out of my sleep by this phone call. We had a young woman in the congregation who had come into the congregation who was studying. She was getting very close to baptism. She'd been in the Peace Corps and had suffered some real emotional distress from the assignment she got from that. And one of my fellow intelligent elders had told her to get off her medication. It was pharmakia. It was some mild sedative that kept her in a kind of nice, balanced thing. It was nothing heavy. It was nothing strange. But that was definitely pharmakia. So she went off it within a week. The reaction was she had this, like a nervous condition seize her this night. She had her aunt and her sons cornered in the kitchen with a huge knife, screaming. I mean, this thing was an incredible scenario. And they said, "You've got to talk to an elder. You've got to talk to an elder." So she said, I'll talk to Brother Chretien. So she gets me on the phone. And in my elder-like fashion, and in my own strength, I'm talking to her for probably an hour. And she's semi in a state of hysterics most of the time. Going this and that, and up and down, what she doesn't like about a million things. And as fast as it came into my mind, the instant it came into my mind, I said, "Connie, Jesus loves you." And she came off the ceiling. Boom. I said, "Go to bed, and we'll come and see you in the morning." She says, "Yes, I will." And off she went.
I'm lying in bed trying to sleep. 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Oh, these problems, they're always so... And all of a sudden he says, "Connie, Jesus loves you." My eyes get that big, and I didn't sit up in bed, but almost. Where did that come from? You know that Jehovah's Witnesses do not say that kind of thing. How evangelical, Really, Leonard. Meanwhile...
She didn't say that to me. She was she's a very submissive woman.
Yes. Meanwhile, I don't know if Leonard really, at that moment in time, realized what he'd said, but in fact it was exactly what Connie needed to hear. The Lord knew what Connie needed to hear. Pleased to report, Connie is now out of Jehovah's Witnesses and in a Christian church.
Time was rolling along. I remember going to another elders meeting, and one of the brothers came in. He had a personal friend back in Brooklyn. He said, "You'll never believe what happened in Brooklyn, spring of 1980. And I sat there. I said, "We've got a few moments. What happened in Brooklyn in 1980? Spring of 1980. So anyway, we got the whole story, and I found it fascinating. Yeah, I really did, because by this time I was moving very rapidly with dissatisfaction. I just knew there was something wrong in Denmark, and I had to address it, and I was going to have to address it pretty quick. I knew that instinctively. I was presiding overseer, as a matter of fact. And that year, we went to the assembly in San Diego a few months later. And fortunately, I didn't have any assignments. We always have these incredible assignments that keep you busy. Another brother and I were in charge of renting all the hotels for the whole city. So we'd done our job a few weeks before, and it was out of the way. So we were roaming around and so forth. And outside, we had these courageous, dear persons quietly on the sidewalk going along with ticket cards, okay? And I thought, I'm going to talk to these people. Remember, an elder can talk to Satan. He might persuade him to repent. So I'm starting to walk up to them and going to talk to them. And one of the young brothers sees this. This is going to be interesting. And he comes up to me and says, "Brother Chretien, what are you going to do? What should we do about these people?" I said, "Don't ask me." I said, "I'm not in charge of security, and I would highly suggest you do nothing, because they're on the public sidewalk and they don't seem to be disturbing anybody. Don't do anything. Just leave it alone." I thought, there's no way I'm going to be able to talk to these people, because people would crowd in, Yeah.
I have to interject. It's not on the outline.
Told you about the talking fever we have?
I turned to the young man and I said, "It's our turn now, brother." And he said, "What do you mean, it's our turn?" I said, "Well, this is what we did. Jehovah's Witnesses did outside the churches in the 1930s.
Actually, I pray for that young man. I think he's a beautiful young fellow. I think of him quite a bit. I know that the Lord is going to reach him. Anyway, when we were in the assembly, the vision I told you about, or this, not vision, this way I saw things suddenly in a moment of time, whatever. I was sitting there, and it came back again, but it lasted more than a few seconds. It lasted quite a while. So that's tape 4, so-and-so, click, the same rehash, just a few little nuances and so on. But again, I'm watching children being hit. I'm watching people tired and sweaty and fidgeting and worn and so on. And I saw them again, exactly the same. But instead of talking to them, I was sitting amongst them, and I was just looking around. I said to Marge, I think it was about mid-afternoon, I said, let's go. And so as we were driving out, I said, take the phone number off that picket. As soon as I got home, I went to the phone number, and it was a recorded message, one of the phone ministries, which are one of the most effective tools that we can use. And it was Los Angeles. And the message, I can't remember what it was. Whatever it was, I just nodded my head, and I can't answer it. I said, Marge, dialed it again. I said, listen to this. Yeah. So I said, okay, I want these tracks, whatever it is that they're talking about, this package that they want to send, I want it. So I said, you call back and leave your... Oh, yeah, that's right. You came up with this idea.
They said at the end of this message, if you want further information, did we want further information? Leave your name and address. My goodness, who are these people? Are these witnesses in the local area, underground? If we put our name on this phone ministry, gossip being what it is, will we walk into the Kingdom Hall next week and they'll say, I hear you call phone ministry. Whatever, you're scared. You are afraid
Yes, the paranoia.
to put your name out that you'll get caught. So we left my middle and maiden name. I am Marjorie Lenore Lucas. So we sent it in Lenore Lucas and gave our address, hoping that postman would deliver it. But of course the Holy Spirit was working this whole thing out anyway, so of course it was going to get delivered. And I don't know if you want me to say who it was.
Yeah, you can. Sure, go ahead.
Interesting. I'm going to say for phone ministries. Never give up, and I know it's very, very frustrating. You never get to know what happens. People call you. You can hear that thing clicking on at 2 and 3 and 4 in the morning. You know these are witnesses who are calling while their other family members are in bed, so they won't be caught. And they'll call for years. Some of you have mentioned how some have called for as much as a year, long distance, and finally got out. And you'll never often hear who you helped come out. And we did not connect with these people. They sent us a few little tracts over about a 6-month period of time. I loved what they said. Meanwhile, on the back it was stamped, Help Jesus. For some reason, that was very evangelical. I didn't like that. But okay, don't look at the Help Jesus stamp. Just read the tract. And I liked what I read. Over about a 6-month period of time, they would send us a few tracts, and then they stopped coming. But by then, we had received this material in the mail, and Leonard had sent off for Edmund Gruss's books, and he's going to tell you that. Maybe you'll tell us what you did.
The fact of the matter is, the package came in within a couple of days. And although the things dribbled in for many months, they dribbled in far beyond the time period we needed them. Because as we got the tracts, there were order forms in there and so forth. And actually, we'd gone into any Christian bookstore, we could have got the books that we got a hold of. I sent away for Apostles in Denial, Jehovah's Witnesses and Prophetic Speculation. We left Jehovah's Witnesses, a non-profit organization. These characters were in there. Masters of Deception, all of these. And bang, they were just coming in. I was just reading them. Boom, 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 boom. This is July, August. Rotation time coming up in September. I remember to this day again, sitting by the fireplace. Marjorie's in the kitchen. I said, Marjorie, I laid the last book down of the ones I said, I'm resigning as an elder in September at the rotation. And I did. And we found out later that actually this couple, because they used to keep records of the names, we said, take your little box, see if there's a Lenore Lucas in there. Oh yeah, we received that call. This is a couple of years later. We're visiting these people, Walton, Carol Davis out in Clayton there. And there's the name when we called for this. So some of these tracts, some of them I was not too impressed with. They didn't get to me. But the false prophecy and all that kind of thing, that really got to me. And the doctrinal changes and so forth. So we resigned. I resigned as an elder. We stopped going to meetings. Next 1.5 years, we read everything and studied and started to gather a library and so on. And I guess I kind of mainlined false prophecy. That was really the thing. Frankly speaking, it was the longest time before I even wanted to bother addressing the doctrinal things. It really was. It It was the 180-degree back and forth, all these changes, the best of rims, the false prophecies, all of this type of thing. I went down and peeked at the house. I thought, oh boy, yeah, that's great. And all of this kind of thing, and that's something we addressed later as far as the doctrinal matters. We listened to all kinds of tapes. Kenneth Gwindon, Firefighters for Christ, all of these incredible names that are coming in, all these things. Bill Setner, who I've got to admit, can I admit something? At first I thought, oh, that guy, I don't know, he seems a little far out. Somebody said to me today, one of those tapes you did early on, gee, you seem strident in that, Leonard. It's impressions, first impressions, they don't last, right? Anyway, but we didn't come to the point of sending in a letter of disassociation till August of 1982 because there was a reason for that. Okay, Marjorie?
I might say that we were very careful during this time, and an elder, the other, quote, quote, strong elder in the congregation, there were 5 elders when Leonard was serving. Leonard and this other brother were the more dominant elders. So while we were sitting out there for this year and a half, this one other elder did call on us 3 times. But we were very, very careful because I wanted to get a chance to speak to my mother who lived in Canada. I have a brother and a mother who are still Jehovah's Witnesses in Canada. But I wanted an opportunity to get her down to visit me so I could start to show her some of these things because I knew that when I resigned, she might not speak to me again. I didn't know how she would handle it. So we delayed. We're also Canadian. We're also conservative, and you don't rush into things if you're of our personality type. So we took our time. We thoroughly researched it. And as Leonard said, we did leave. We did send our formal letter of disassociation in 1982. When you first leave, of course, you think you are the only person that has ever done this thing, right? You're the only one. Leonard and I felt totally alone. We were the only persons who had ever done that, and we did feel we were totally alone other than these tapes that we had received. Meanwhile, this is why we ourselves carry tapes. Those tapes were literally a lifeblood to us. To sit and listen to tapes. Of course, we've got even more excellent tapes since then. We started to get the tapes after we resigned of this conference, which were just absolutely wonderful. I iron and listen to them, and everything was great.
I'd like to add, I have a special affection for the tapes of Gordon Bryden. I think he did incredible research on those tapes he did. Yes. They were excellent. Facts.
Beautiful. What we did find then, once we had made the move to disassociate ourselves, then we felt free to kind of stick our nose up. And thrill of thrills, we met all these wonderful persons through correspondence, phone calls, and it became obvious to us that this was of God. We found these persons, too, seemed to individually come to these things, all at a certain period of time. And contrary to the Watchtower Society's statement that these were the weak ones who didn't want to do the service or who wanted to go out and lead some immoral life, here we were meeting people who were long-time Jehovah's Witnesses, who'd served most of their lives, in fact, given their very lives and given up so much for the Watchtower, missionaries, district and circuit overseers, Bethelites, ones who had been born into 3rd and 4th generation Jehovah's Witness families. I felt that the Lord had really been doing a wonderful work at this time. I didn't know what it was, and I still don't really know. I know something great's going on, and I feel that He has drawn all of us out for a very, very special purpose, for which I'm very grateful. I reflect on the fact that Leonard and I are now middle-aged, and while others in our age group are having some kind of a midlife crisis or whatever, Leonard and I have found that really the past 5 years of our life have been the happiest we have ever had. Really the most fulfilling years of our lives. I can't wait, really, to see what's going to happen in the next 25 years for all of us, because the Lord's got something wonderful in store for all of us. He's done it for a reason.
We wanted to, when we did this letter of disassociation too, I wanted to just add that it wasn't just under false prophecy and so on. By this time, we began to realize that we wanted to sever our tie with an organization that had denied its members the fullness of a relationship with Jesus Christ. We began to see that. We began to see that clear, and we saw that more clear. We didn't see it totally in its total focus, but we knew enough. And we had come to understand, of course, that our salvation was by grace, and all that worthless, nonsensical time that we'd put in and so forth was just so much garbage. We'd really come to realize that. Anyway, we attended in the spring of 1983 an ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, Witnesses Now for Jesus in Costa Mesa. I think you called it this. You gave it the same title as I recall. It was sponsored by Bill and Joan, and Randy, I believe, was involved with that, if I'm not mistaken, setting that up. Anyway, as a result of being there, we got fired with the idea of an outreach ministry. I'd already done a few little papers and things that I wanted to do, but I just gave them to people. I wasn't involved with it at all. I just printed them and gave them, said, here, do you want to use these? Go ahead and use them, whatever. And we met many persons, of course, at Costa Mesa, many of whom are here tonight. And one of the persons we met, interestingly, had brought to our attention something we had not heard about. You know, everything was happening kind of fast after that, too. Everything happened fast, up to the point we went into that 1.5 years of just kind of examining and reading, and then things started to happen again very rapidly. Laurie McGregor mentioned to us about this film called The God Makers, which was, of course, the film exposing Mormonism. And she said, you really want to see it. It's an outstanding movie, and it's so interesting and so forth. And I think she even mentioned it would be so nice if somebody would do one on the witnesses. Anyway, within a couple of months, we saw an ad in the Saturday paper that the next day was going to be shown at a large church in San Diego. Now, anybody who's going to play with this film, anybody who's going to work with this film, anybody going to use it in any way, I really suggest that if you can convince the church to put a little ad in, it can draw in all kinds of incredible people that are interested in one way or another, like Marjorie and I are interested to see this film because it was germane to everything we were thinking about and what was going on. It's so handy. We went there. It was a church that would seat probably 1,200 people, a very large church. It was packed out. There was 1,500 people there in attendance for this movie showing, and the chairs and everything were brought in from the outside and all down the aisles. It was just absolutely packed out. When the film was shown, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, it was just, everybody was fascinated. And I was fascinated, and Marjorie was fascinated. The parallels, the parallels tell you it's out of the same dark place. Just amazing. Anyway, at the conclusion of the film, the moment the film was over, now we're talking 1,500 people are in this audience. The film is over, the lights come on, and the first words out of a young woman that's sitting directly behind me to her companion is, oh, I wish somebody would do a film like this on Jehovah's Witnesses. I thought, yeah, gee, I wish they would. That'd be terrific. That really would be. Well, I had already met Ed Decker at a little conference that we shared in just before the Costa Mesa thing that I'd shared in with him. And I'd met him, and I met him again a few months later, and time went on, and I guess it must have been by about early 1984. I just got this idea, well, who's doing this film? So I phoned Ed Decker, and I said, have you ever heard of anybody doing this film, or anything? He said, well, I have no connection with it. I don't know of anybody. And I said, I don't know. I said, I wonder if I shouldn't attempt to do that. And, of course, he started knocking out some of the budgets and so on, for the God Makers, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, well, boy, that's an awful lot of money. He says, the only way you're going to do it right, Leonard, is if you do it professional. He says, if you go the other way, you won't have any kind of a film. He said, why don't you call Pat? So I did call him, introduced myself, and Pat said, well, actually, he says, I got about 4 people right now that have been talking to me and are very interested in doing a Jehovah's Witness film. I said, hey, great, that's fine. That's if you're going to be doing one, I'm just so pleased to hear that. We really would need one out here because after Costa Mesa, we had started this Good News Defenders outreach, and we were doing all these different things, and we knew the need that was out there. So we'd already had this thing in place for about a year. And he said, well, who are you? A little bit. We got chatting. He said, come on up to Burbank. He said, I'd really like to talk to you about this thing. And so we did. So I sat him down for about a 3-hour monologue about Jehovah's Witnesses from A to Z. And I couldn't see it as being as colorful a subject as Mormonism. And at the conclusion, I said to him, well, what do you think? I said, do you think it's got enough, there's enough of a story there to really do a film on it? And in his own inimitable way, he says, a hound dog like raw meat. Anyway, we we've been working on that film since then. We are very, very sorry that we were not able to bring you a completed film. I brought along a film clip that was used at the Christian Film Distributors Association in August, which are all the film libraries. That's what it was designed for. I've also instructed, they should be here any moment, I instructed Bill to bring in about 30 dozen eggs. There's an eggery not too far from here. I said, get something about 5 or 6 weeks old and just distribute them. And if people want to throw them instead of seeing this clip, whatever. But anyway, I'm embarrassed about the fact that it's a slow, tedious thing. And actually, in terms of timing, we're exactly on the same time schedule as it took to produce the Godmakers. I'll tell you after the film why it takes so long and so on. I won't bore you too long, but I'll give you a few little details about that. And just before we show that, I have to just share one last thing. We did a little track, and you know, we talked about the phone ministries and we talked about all of these different things. But you know, there are so many people out there so ready to either leave the witnesses and or stop associating with them. Since this little tract came out, the American Tract Society asked me to do this a few months ago, and I almost refused to do it because I was so busy. But it was a blessing. It's been a real blessing. In the first 3 months, over 100,000 of these went out, and I started getting calls immediately. Phone calls and letter inquiries. We probably stop a few studies a month off it. You can't believe it. You cannot believe what's happening with this little thing. One of the first calls I got, it was a young man who that morning had walked into his church, armed with all his books that he had been studying with, to tear the skin off his pastor. And he started into the pastor, and the pastor said, before you go any farther, he says, I just got a bundle of these tracts. He says, why don't you at least read this? And call this man. He says, I think it kind of makes sense. And if you still feel the same way, come on back and we'll discuss this problem. So he phoned me. We're on the phone an hour and a half. He's just getting ready to be baptized. We're on the phone an hour and a half. At the end of the hour and a half, he said, okay, no, I've wasted my time. It's wrong. And he said, what should I do with my books? I'm stopping the study. I won't go any farther. I said, take them to your minister. Give them to him. And he'll get a little insight into what it is that he's dealing with. He stopped the study from that day forward. That was it. He phoned me back within a couple of weeks' time. He says, you'll never guess right. And wow, he was talking like some born-again evangelical Christian, that young man. He called me, and he said, I stopped the study, and the witness I was studying with, I called him back to say, well, look, just because we stopped studying, I'd like some of these questions answered. And he says, I have no time to throw pearls to the swine. Something else? Isn't that something else? Typical. Anyway, there's all manner of things that we're using. All of us were using books. We're using this. We're using that. I hope that when this film is finished, that it'll be what all of us expect. I trust it will be. I'll just get this out of the way and we'll get going.